Hey, Mike.
Hey.
Hey, it's great to see you.
What's up, Leo? Good to see you, brother.
This is an awesome background. I love it, Mike.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Been tinkering around a little bit.
It's so...
Wait. How about this one? Boom.
Wow. This is really great, actually. Is this a green screen? It's doing so well.
Brother, it's a green screen. Yeah, so we kind of moved. I still have the one setup where at my standing desk over in the corner, you can kind of see the backdrop of the gym. I think the last time I was on there for you.
Yeah.
But we put in a green screen.
This is the best green screen I've seen, actually. Usually people lose half their head constantly when they have a green screen. Yours is doing very well, actually.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
So, Mike, I've collected a lot of questions, some from myself and some from the subscribers for you, because we haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah.
And I've been learning a little bit more about MMA sort of indirectly. Let's start with the interesting topic where I've been coming across it, the celebrity matches.
Okay.
But I don't know if this has been going on for a long time. I wanted to ask you what you think about the popularity of celebrity matches in fighting. Is it dangerous for people that are not fighters? Is it good for the sport? Do you see it as a positive thing? How do you reflect on it?
Each one of those are individual questions. So I'll give you the overview for the concept of time. I think celebrity matches are good in that there is the ability for every human to express themselves in a violent manner through violence, through organized violence, through rules, agreed upon rules, fisticuffs. Sure, that's great. Climb mountains, drive fast cars, or even bodybuilding, which is probably more dangerous by far. That being said, there is a conflation of the ability of the celebrity to be a boxer or a fighter. So being a good celebrity fighter, like Jake Paul, he's a good celebrity fighter. He is not in the category of the greatest fighters who happen to be celebrities based upon their fighting ability. Now, Jake Paul could be 2 years into a stellar career. We don't know yet. He's 2 years into a combat career and he's got some wins. So he's slowly, and I'd say it might take another 2 to 3 years or so of escalating matchups like you see in boxing. You'll get a boxing prospect that'll have 20 fights against journeymen, 2 and 10 guys, 4 and 6 guys, 5 and 5 guys, 10 and 4 guys. Slowly there will be an escalation. So that being said, happy to see athletes do that, actors, celebrities do that are training to do that and are doing it respectfully. Not so much the Jose Cansecos of the world. So that is different. Jake Paul's training for real. So he's at least respecting the craft.
I was also watching an interview of Jose Canseco. I didn't know that he had fights as well, and he didn't do too well on them, I think, which is incredible because he's such an athlete physically. I really didn't know he's 6'4" and extremely muscular. I really didn't realize that originally. So I wanted to ask you, who were the best celebrity boxers then off the top, or fighters, sorry, off the top of your head in your recollection? Were there some good celebrities that surprised you?
I would say, well, Jake Paul is surprising. Let's talk about him. You look at what he's doing. Kid hits hard. You know, he steps forward. He has good fundamentals and he's aggressive. That's the rare thing. I know great athletes, amazing Olympic level athletes that don't have that same on switch in the face of violence. Jake Paul has that. Fault him, if you will, for his bravado. But you can't fault him for his willingness to engage, Leo. And I think that's really what makes great fighters. It's the willingness to engage more so than the beautiful technique or even the lineage of training. He's got that one thing.
Fascinating. So I want to ask you then, as you've been seeing MMA become more professionalized and athletes coming in as fighters, do you see less of that fighting spirit in athletes as compared to traditional fighters? Or especially in the beginning when you had those sort of rough and tumble fighters that weren't really trained as much in fighting arts in the beginning of MMA? I don't know what they call them. Like the guy with the big belly, he used to be an awesome Abbott, is his name?
Tank Abbott.
Yeah, like those kind of guys. Is those guys had more fighting spirit maybe than the athletes that come in later, or is it sort of something that can be taught?
I wouldn't say if it's more or less fighting spirit. I think there's more on the line now. The numbers are much bigger. The career is now a career. It's not a concrete worker who then fights a few times. So I think that's a part of it. But I don't think that's any different over generations in time. When Sugar Ray Leonard was fighting, I mean, he was the highest paid boxer of his day. Now you have undercard athletes making vastly more than he was making at that time. So I think as that grows, the strategy changes. And I think a lot of this is strategic. So heart-wise, fighting brings in people with heart. You don't get into fighting because you lack heart, I would say.
Well, that's interesting. Good point. There's actually also been some celebrity boxing matches where they've been trying to promote the gloves up, guns down attitude between people that might get into violence and stuff like that. Okay. So that's also fantastic as well. I wanted to ask you, Mike, I don't know much about boxing. And a few days ago, I was watching an interview of a boxer who had like 30 KOs and 0 losses. But he fought all his boxing matches in Mexico, which I was curious about. Is that a way that some boxers can plan their matches such that they win most of the initial matches to develop a better record? Is that done? Why would somebody choose all their matches in Mexico? That's what I was curious about.
So I alluded to that earlier in speaking with Jake Paul and scaling. Very common in boxing or in good sports strategy. If you're a good manager and agent that's bringing an athlete through their career, you're going to start them in lesser organized, lesser restricted, lesser controlled, less risk matchups as the athlete gets ready, putting on their fresh shoes for the first time, getting the brand new glasses or gloves laced up and the bright lights and the cameras in their face. Let's worry about that part before we fight the 10-0 24-year-old killer. So I believe that's part of it. Now, boxing is massive in Mexico.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it's massive. It's the culture in Mexico. Boxing gyms, every street, everywhere. Everybody boxes. The women will hit you with a clean one too. Wow. In Mexico, right? It's part of the culture, which is beautiful. So that being said, you go to Mexico, you get your ass kicked too.
Okay. I had no idea.
So I think it's just a matter of bringing an athlete up through the proper matchups.
One final question before we go back to my saved questions that I actually wanted to ask you. But one other thing, there was I can't remember his name, but there was an African-American street fighter from California, I believe, from Northern California, who was bald. And he became a very good MMA fighter, but died recently of a heart attack a few years ago. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do not.
He had a beard. He was very aggressive all over the media.
Kimbo Slice?
Kimbo Slice, exactly. I wanted to ask you, was he like a talented fighter?
Kimbo Slice, who I was friends with and friendly with and a peer of and got to spend some good time with him, was a real fighter. And he was a superstar. And he was charismatic. He was, in a way, a Jake Paul, an early Jake Paul. He was an internet sensation because of his YouTube backyard fights. Him and Jorge Masvidal came up on the very same circuit. And that's in Florida, Southern Florida, I believe, in that area. Okay. So they came up, and that's real deal. These are real guys who then could monetize it. It's like a loan shark eventually opening up his own credit union or local bank, right? Eventually you move into that stage.
Fascinating. Okay, so I wanted to ask you a couple of things, Mike, because I've been learning about, I've been trying to estimate how MMA fighters prepare in terms of recovery, training, and stuff like that. I have a few questions for myself before we take questions from my subscribers. The first one I want to ask about is, when MMA athletes train multiple times a day, do they organize their carbohydrates and refueling in a way sort of like a powerlifter or a bodybuilder would train twice a day? Or is it more like an endurance athlete that needs a lot of, for example, a lot of simple carbohydrates constantly? Great.
Right, so terrible. I call it. I'll answer this question in a second, but I did Rich Franklin's podcast recently. Rich Ace Franklin, 3-time UFC world middleweight champion, vice president of ONE FC, superstar, international superstar. Got his own great podcast, which would be great guest, I think, for you guys to speak back and forth. Brilliant, scientific.
I need to get more guests from you. I was going to ask you after. Yeah, I'd love to.
Let's do that for sure. But we were telling jokes with each other about our sexy man photos. Right, because we're like, dude, it's like so embarrassing. I say I walk in someone's house and my book and the cover kind of is sexy man. I turn it over. I'm so embarrassed. And he had one in his foyer that like a neighbor saw. It was like, got a photo of yourself like in your foyer.
You just posted one on Instagram. It was a great one too.
Right.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I believe it was about the nutrition program for MMA versus bodybuilding competitors.
Yeah, how do they refuel with all that volume? That's what I'm curious. What kind of carbohydrates do they use?
Well, I like to go simple. And when I say simple, I mean real food. We stick to healthful whole foods, real food. We stick to fruits. We stick to white rice. We stick to
White rice.
Healthful, high quality, high net nutrient foods. That's our sources. Some in this industry, they go to the waxy maize and the carbolins and the dextrose solutions and the Pedialytes and all the other things, the nun tabs and all that stuff. What I've seen, and I'll speak to MMA, but we also help physique competitors and all that get ready, because if you look at our athletes, I mean, we can get to that super low body fat percentage. Yeah. But in a manner that you can, again, I keep leaning forward just because I don't want to be a douchey at the same time, but it's a good example because that's fucking hard. It's hard to train at that level, right? That hard for 25 minutes, 45 minutes to go nonstop. Bodybuilding's hard in its own way. And at the end of the competition, the training, that's a great photo of Gastelum. Wow. At the end, they still have to compete in this highly glycolytic fashion, this fashion that pushes every aspect of energy, substrate utilization. Every aspect of the soul is pushed, where bodybuilding is hard in its own. I got to stand here super dehydrated, breathe. Yeah. Hopefully I don't fucking pass out walking across stage. So you think about the performance parameter, they have to be just as lean, but our athletes have to perform. And I think this is now I'm kind of doing an op-ed for you. This is the better way. By far, it's the better way. And bodybuilders, they freak out. Even Rich, frankly, he couldn't understand how we can feed our athletes fruit 4 times a day, all the way up, nonstop. We don't pull it at all.
So can I ask you, is it impossible to rely mainly on complex carbohydrates for these athletes? Is the energy demand too intense, or the digestion demand due to the calories?
It depends, I think, on the intensity of the training sessions and the proximity of meal intake to the training session. So you can be more targeted, and I say very strategic. We're nutrient strategic, which is how we can have high levels of fruit. High levels, 4 servings of fruit is high level in modern health and fitness, which makes no sense to us. But with that, how can we be so strategic? And we can time it with the training demand and to facilitate the training effect. I believe it's even more like cold pressed beet juice 30 to 90 minutes before a highly glycolytic activity. Fucking insane. It's interesting. High level of performance enhancement.
Now, can I ask you, what about electrolytes? How do you guys generally approach it? Are people taking 3 to 4 grams of sodium a day, and are they supplementing a lot of magnesium? How do people usually approach it for MMA athletes?
So there's the way the others do it, and then the way that we do it. And some might do it similar to what we do, but less certainly do. We're a little bit different. I think, I'll illustrate that, but we're not unique. I don't want to pretend and act like I'm the Weeder principles per se. But in general, we use high quality, high net nutrient foods first. That's where we go to. So that's where we go to, fresh and live and local and raw and organic and in season and the highest net nutrient capacity per calories. That's where we go to first. So with that, as we look in, and this is carbohydrates, we're speaking of the timing of the simple versus the complex.
First, we're talking about that, but also now the minerals. So magnesium, salt.
Minerals. Yeah. So with that, we look to the food groups. Like magnesium, I would much rather get magnesium from 73% or greater organic dark chocolate than throw in a couple extra gelatin coated pills in my mouth. I'm going to get it from that. Yeah, and I say, how many girls does that nutrient bring to the party, right? If I'm going to invite my buddy, he better bring 2 or 3 girls with him. I just don't need my buddy here, right? That's kind of the way we make the food metaphor. So hopefully there's a greater context.
Yeah.
But with that, we go with the high net nutrient sources of high quality foods first. And then if there's deficiencies, then we can start to fill those in through strategic, again, we're very strategic supplementation. I know you like Jarrow. I like Jarrow. That's probably my top over-the-counter company is Jarrow. And with that, so like sea salt, Himalayan sea salt, iodized table salt, we will have that in. And from to close a sodium intake, probably 3 to 6 grams a day, depending on humidity, depending on elevation, depending on training affect how often you train, how hydrated you are, the other cofactors in the foods that you consume?
This just came into my mind. I want to ask you before I forget. Are there hematocrit limits for MMA fighters? Like there is in cycling where you can't be above 50 hematocrit?
As far as straight hematocrit, I believe that would indicate a secondary test to look for other agents. So I don't think
that's what I was wondering. So potentially somebody could like put themselves in a high elevation chamber as long as they're not using drugs. They could get their hematocrit higher. You think that would be okay, allowed in the competition?
That's why, guys, there's so many great camps up in Colorado.
No way. Oh, that's where I was born, by the way. I was thinking about Colorado. I was thinking, why don't people train there?
Colorado's a hotbed and nobody wants to fight there either, right? You don't want to come from Miami and go fight in Colorado with it on short notice.
That's fascinating. Okay, I wanted to ask you, okay, so this is a brief drug question, but we won't get into too much detail. What I want to ask is this. So my sport that I used to compete in is arm wrestling. In arm wrestling, of course, in arm wrestling, PEDs are extremely faux pas. People don't speak about it very much. But I know from the arm wrestlers I know that usually arm wrestlers try not to use PEDs that can give them water retention because it really harms their endurance on the table. Okay. Does something similar happen to MMA fighters where they don't want to have a lot of water retention, so they have to use dry compounds?
MMA fighters don't even consider that. That doesn't even come across their radar until maybe within 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, 1 week out of weigh-ins. The only time MMA fighters think about water weight is weigh-in related. They have no care, no consideration. They don't measure it really. So I think on the performance enhancing side, if that's where we're going on, the MMA athlete is only concerned with performance. That's it. Only concerned with how it improves their in competition performance, period, the end. So I think the reason behind an MMA athlete, and a bodybuilder are completely different motives, in getting into the same niche.
In arm wrestling, sort of the goal actually is the opposite of the bodybuilder's goal. He wants to get strong and get more endurance without getting any bigger. Ideally, he'd like to stay in the same weight class, but have the strength of a bigger weight class, So because I remember, Mike, I messaged you a while ago about this Brazilian jiu-jitsu athlete who was messaging me. He wanted to potentially get a sponsorship. So I've been helping him a little bit, thinking about his training. And this is why these thoughts were coming into my mind, because I was trying to figure out, and what do they really want? What I see is nervous strength and endurance is the most desirable.
Yes.
So I also wanted to ask you, a couple more things. So bone strength. In MMA, do people break their bones? Does this happen?
Yes. Recently, Chris Weidman, former UFC middleweight world champion, ironically won his second world title against Anderson Silva in a rematch when Anderson Silva threw a low leg kick. Chris checked it properly with his shin and snapped Anderson Silva's lower leg in half. So it was a floppy sock right at the bottom of his knee. Horrendous, but not uncommon. I probably know personally 5 guys it's happened to, and at least 10 that I'm peripherally associated with. Just happened to Weidman against Uriah Hall. Weidman throws low leg kick. Uriah Hall just kind of checks it a little bit, snaps it in half. Brutal. So yes, many bone issues. And one of the reasons why we do prefer getting semi-regular DEXA scans on our athletes as a part of the diagnostic phase that we'll go through is get the DEXAs, let's take a look and let's set some benchmarks.
It's interesting because, one of the effects of androgens is actually to dramatically upregulate I forgot what they call it, but the osteoblasts that create bone formation. So if someone was taking androgens with like high vitamin D with calcium for a few years, their bones will probably get quite a bit thicker. It's quite an interesting observation. Another thing I want to ask you about is grip training in arm wrestling. In MMA. So it may be different between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I assume, and when you're not wearing gis. But do people train grip separate from MMA? And do you think there's value in doing that? Because I've talked to a couple of people and they say they probably get enough training from their own just MMA training. They don't want to use pinch block weights and things like that, which can really thicken the hand, really make you stronger at these pinch holds. What do you think about that? Is there value to separate grip training?
I do it.
Oh, yeah.
I do it. I strongly suggest our athletes do it. And then once we have it, as you know, it is brought along as everything else. We would consider it a skill. So it's on our spreadsheet. We want to make sure that we always touch it. We pay attention to it, right? We serve it, if you will. We measure it, compare it, so we always pay attention. But simple, and part of our normal programming, we almost never wear straps, let's say. So in gym training primarily, we almost never wear straps. We're always hefting and heaving and throwing and hurling and hanging and pulling and dragging and ropes. And, what we will do is we'll throw like a gi over the chin-up bar and do chin-ups in gis, things like that. We have buckets here, so we'll dig through ball bearings and sand. I got sand on the beach, so we'll kind of squeeze the sand and dig through.
And when I used to be a grip guy, I used to put my hands in sand and expand the fingers. It does this, like rehabilitation, because when you grip too much, you sometimes get an imbalance. So you can put your hand in sand and expand it. It's an interesting trick. I also do that with rubber bands sometimes. I used to be really into hand strength for some reason. But I wanted to ask you, so Stan Efferding went on FW's podcast recently, and Stan was talking about active recovery being the best way to enhance recovery from MMA training. I think he's helping John Jones train, who I don't know very well, but I don't know that much about, but I know he's one of the greatest. So I was going to ask you, what is active training for someone's arms, for example, in MMA? How does someone get blood flow there without tiring it?
So we wouldn't as often separate body parts or muscle groups. We think more of movement patterns and energy systems. Okay. So if there's some sort of arm or upper body, more specific issue, pushing, concept issue, maybe we do some sort of yoga. So active recovery could be what? So we'll go to the banya. We'll sit at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 or more minutes and 45 minutes or 45 degrees for 6 minutes, run rotations like that. Kettlebells. We'll farmers walk with kettlebells, 1 kettlebell, 2 kettlebells, offset kettlebells, trap bars. Okay. We'll go to the beach and just walk on the sand, let's say, or do some bear crawls and hill climbs and things like that. I think for us, proximity will change the pattern, the implement, let's say, but we're still training the same movement patterns. I live on the beach. I'm going to use the beach and the sand dunes. And, if you live in the city, well, you're going to do something differently with that. It could be as simple as just, shadow boxing and flowing, also active recovery. But I think Stan's right, and he's on it with that, to get that probably 20 to 40 minutes of active recovery. I'm assuming, now I'm just projecting, after hard, intense training phases or on specified off days, there should be that continued flow, so.
What's electric stimulation for muscles in recovery? I hear about this from a gentleman who's in LA. He's at the Gold's Gym. He's famous. I think his name is Brad. He's doing a lot of electric stimulation for people. What does that involve, really?
From my experience working for 30 years, almost since 93, I officially opened my personal training business at 17 years old. And I've seen lots of therapies come in and out that are very similar, and dietary strategies, keto, very famously or so. But these stim machines and these TENS units, I had them. I had 10 of them, of these different machines and units, and you hook them on.
We've been seeing them for 10 years. 20 years on like advertisements on the TV, So I was wondering if this thing is legit, it's different, or?
It's legit if you believe it's legit.
Yeah, that's with everything, though.
It's with everything, right, bro? It's with everything. It's all right if maybe it makes you feel the muscle. Hey, if you have some nerve damage and you put some in, maybe it does actually create that connection with the nerve. Sure, I'll give it that. But man, I see these dudes walking around with they're got like blood flow restrictive training. They got the big straps on. They got these electric stims, and their fucking ass hanging out like they're a fitness chick. It's like
this is happening in arm wrestling too. It's actually quite funny. Arm wrestlers are doing it for their lower arms too. Can I ask you, Mike? So do free radicals look? There's obviously about all the research that says that if you take free radical scavengers like vitamin C or something right after a workout, you'll recover slower. Now, the thing is, though, I was thinking about MMA fighters because their workouts have a lot of damage. Like, it's not just working out a muscle, but sometimes you're hurting yourself, getting injured, and so on. So I was curious if you've seen like IV vitamin therapy, for example, if somebody does that twice a week, do they recover faster or does it impede their training? What do you think?
I would say from personal experience, it's a faster recovery rate as long as you're doing everything else equally.
Yeah. I thought so. I've seen that myself. Yeah, right. Shouldn't it be more promoted, I think?
It should be. I think access and it feels like you're a drug addict. I think to the average person, we're more enlightened, let's say, or just experienced. We understand the science, which maybe gets us over that. I'm going to sit in the chair with needles in me. Like, am I a drug addict here? I think that's what most people, they default to first. But I agree with you. When I was in Vegas, it was very accessible. It was a part of the culture in Vegas.
I hear about that in Vegas, actually. I was planning to make a trip to Vegas. I was telling my wife, I can get IV vitamins. She said it costs the same here as in LA as in Vegas. Don't get too excited. But anyway,
yeah,
it's a bit, maybe it's a bit cheaper. But I have also a client, one of my coaching clients and one of my most dear friends. He loves MMA. He's very interested in the field. He works in banking. He works in a great job in banking, but he wants to somehow be involved in that in his career one day. And he doesn't know how exactly, maybe in commentary, maybe he has a blog or something like that. I wanted you to tell me, are there opportunities for people to work in MMA that are not coaches or not fighters? And what are they? What would you advise someone to look at that's a young man, 24 years old or so, willing to take a pay cut to build his dreams?
Yeah. Well, what's your angle? What's your hustle? What's your passion? What's your network? What's your proximity? What's your skill set? Like, what's your ROI? Those are the things I would start to build down, and you can figure that out pretty quick. I knew what mine was. Like, you know what yours is, and go ahead. I know you have a question.
No, I mean, like the industry has a lot of commentary, right? It has commentary. I mean, I don't know how the industry is built. Like in bodybuilding, there's photographers. There's people who work in the admin of shows. Like there's different positions. In MMA, is it that the industry that diverse? So there's a lot of places people can find positions for themselves?
Well, more MMA is way, unfortunately, you think about how long bodybuilding has existed and how little bodybuilding has done to evolve from a professional perspective. You look at MMA in a short 20-year period, MMA is owned by Disney. They're an ESPN company, right? They're everywhere. They're on the main page of everything all the time. And bodybuilding is what? Bodybuilding is some kid in Ohio, Nick's Strength and Power, who was able to catapult himself to be the leader in the industry with homage to Louis Marco before him. The UFC's on ESPN, man. Yeah. Like, that's the difference. So how do you get in? Like, look at what Nick did. Nick's Strength and Power, boom, biggest monetizing, whatever he's doing. He is the ESPN now, to be fair, to a degree. He's in that, he created the next category. I don't want to, go too far in that. But for the person right now, what do you have to bring to the table? So this is a banker. He has financial knowledge. Does he want to be an agent, a manager? Does he have a network? Does he want to start a sponsorship? Maybe his own media company. Maybe he wants to get 2 or 3 sponsored fighters, give them the ability to be figureheads and grow in his media brand, whatever that might be. Maybe he wants to come out with a wearable or a widget for MMA, because he knows VCs who he can enter into that market.
This was very inspirational.
I'm sorry?
Thank you, Mike. This is my client's going to be so happy. He said he's going to be so inspired. He's wonderful. He loves you as well.
Talk him through it.
So questions from subscribers. Johan Lugan asks a couple of questions. First, he says, is USADA's testing protocol effective?
If I say yes or no, I'll say no.
Okay.
Is it the best in the industry? Yes.
Interesting. And well, a sub note on that. So when you say it's ineffective, how easy is it? Is it possible for everybody to defeat it, or is it difficult?
I think it's easiest defeated by those with resources, as anything and everything in the world, from global economy on down to doping and fist fighting, for what that's worth. But I think you saw any set of rules is easily challenged and conspired against, especially when there's money and careers and lives on the line. So I think with that, USADA is good for branding. And again, the best in the industry. I don't know. There's no other professional sport that's as serious as the UFC, to be fair to USADA and WADA. But there are always athletes conspiring, and there are always corners and gray markets. Look at Nate Diaz, right? Nate Diaz got popped for the possible contamination of a SARM or a SERM, and I forget what. And as the story rolls out through my memory, so, for what that's worth, it was then reversed because it was unintended ingestion as he was getting ready to fight the big fight versus Masvidal. If that happens to mid-card Joe, that kid's off the card. I've never seen that kid stay on the card. Maybe this exact reason, as they say, special circumstances. Bullshit. So this is why I say it's Nate gets popped Nate gets popped with a banned agent like a week or two before his fight, and the kid fights. Do I think it was intentional? Do I think they conspired? Do I think it was a mastermind? Do I think it was a big mistake? Doesn't fucking matter what I think. What matters is the way the rules are written. So that's why I say, yeah, USADA is easily bent as it seems.
Now, can I ask you, what about the NFL and NBA? If you're saying USADA has better testing procedures than most of the other sports, does this mean that PEDs could be used? I've always assumed that the basketball, they don't use PEDs. I don't know why. I don't know why I assume so.
Oh my God.
They have the highest pay, so they must be. But I don't know why I thought so. So you think it's actually it's as prevalent as it used to be in baseball in the 80s or 90s when Jose Canseco was, having his time?
In my opinion, PEDs are systemic.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Really fascinating. Because I've been in strength sports where we think it's just us, really. We don't usually think about other things. So he asked, I don't know what this means, John Jones's T to E ratio. Do you know what he's talking about? The testosterone-estrogen ratio? Is that what he's talking about?
I
understand something odd about that?
Ratio is. I don't know of
what he's talking about. Yeah, me neither. So he also asked, should weight cutting be banned due to the risks? He says last week a fighter was pushed during the stare down after weigh-ins and suffered whiplash and a concussion probably due to being dehydrated and not being able to withstand the sudden movement. Do you know what he's talking about?
It's odd to see the way these data points are conflated. So he says Drakkar Klose, I believe, was violently, unexpectedly pushed by Jeremy Stevens, one of the most powerful, ferocious knockout punchers in the entire division.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's
not a simple.
And he wound up getting fucking snapped back and got fucking whiplash and strained muscles in his fucking neck.
Okay. I see.
Like,
that's what we're learning from you, though. You're educating all of us. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I know. I say that.
No
so
idea what's going on.
But also weight cutting should weight cutting can't be banned because of how dangerous it is. So the athlete can go out there and fucking fight and swing baseball bats at each other's skulls for 25 minutes through shin kicks and such. Like it's fucking fist fighting, dude.
Exactly. That's true. So you also commented on UFC fighter pay compared to other professional sports.
Yes.
I've heard about this briefly. I've heard that like it's hard to get paid in the lower ranks, but when you get to the higher ranks, the pay gets far better. Is this more disproportionate compared to other sports?
So the UFC, their entry-level pay now is $10,000 to show and $10,000 to win. That runs through a series of contracts that are 3 to 4 fight deals. On average, the athlete's going to get a $2,000 to $5,000 bump on the top and bottom end if they win. And if they lose, their contract freezes. So let's say you get a contract, Leo's fighting in the UFC first contract, 10-10, you win that fight, 12-12, you win that fight, 16-16, you win that fight. You have one more fight at 18 or 20 or 22 and 20, the same thing. But you'll probably renegotiate to another one. Depending on how well you have done, you'll get a low 20, high teen, low 20 first offer to mid 40s, 45 and 45. You're a fucking stud, Sage Northcutt. You're a superstar. Probably ending somewhere closer to high 5 figures, low 6 figure with a win. And then if you're a real prospect, you're signing your big deal. So that's kind of the structure. Every athlete knows that. The percentage of pay the organization gives the athlete, man, that's the fucking deal. But
there's a way for you to work yourself up there. Yeah, okay, I understand.
It's there. Does Dana keep a shitload? Fuck yeah. Like, does he deserve to? Like, maybe. That's up to him. Fucker built it. Like, so I'm very capitalist in that perspective. The athletes are signing. Shit, man, I got a buddy who's a fucking PhD. He makes $300K a year, really not working very hard. He did some 8 years of school or so, and now he sits back making $300 a year, taking fucking 4-day weekends. So big picture here, like I'm just being a realist because I've spoken on this topic a little bit. Should they pay more? Yeah, man, I'd love to see all the athletes. I'd love to see entry level like 50 and 50. I think that'd be a little more. So now you can make 300 in your rookie year if you perform. Kind of now we're like the NFL. We work with NFL and NBA now. We do work with some of those athletes also. So I have a general understanding of how all the sports and the contracts look.
Fascinating. So the Blood Lord, he's a longtime subscriber with a funny name, but great guy. He asks a good question. He says, first 2 podcasts with Mike were great. I would be interested in a discussion about nerve damage and its prevalence in fighting sports, both central nerve damage and peripheral. He said leg kicks to nerves have been TKing fighters of late. Can fighters use nerve growth factors such as cerebral lysine for recovery and or prevention of long-term problems? I'll tell you more about cerebral lysine later, but do people get peripheral nerve damage and central nerve damage from fights?
Say yes.
Interesting.
There's a lot of damages known and unknown in combat sports. You think about how frail the human body actually is and what the demands of this sport are in the training. I mean, the training is 300 days a year, probably once and twice a day. So 600, 500 to 1,000 training sessions, maybe depending on the athlete. Pretty intense, right? High contact, very irregular movement patterns, scrambles and twisting and turning, and lots of shit gets shifted pretty easily. Fuck, man. I pulled my groin, just shifted my ass from one pillow to the other on my couch not too long ago. Like to be fair, it took me like 3 days to get over that.
That starts to happen. Yeah, I know.
Right.
I move wrong and something gets injured. Yeah.
It happens. So MMA, yeah. Nerve damage, absolutely. All sorts of damage is happening.
So I don't know if I ever told you this, Mike, but I really read a lot about TBIs because I had TBIs when I was younger, but also I'm like trying to preserve my brain function as I age. Yeah. So a lot of the ways I can learn about that is either through neurodegenerative disease like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. There's a lot of research there. Then there's a lot of research on TBIs. A couple of things I noticed about TBIs that I'm not sure people are doing in MMA that probably would be very useful. One of them is pretty innocuous, a beta blocker. An adrenaline receptor blocker, when given right after a TBI, tremendously improves recovery. Tremendously. There's a lot of studies on this showing even if you don't take it before. By the way, the same thing happens in surgeries, interestingly. The reason why is this. Apparently, the adrenaline system increases the inflammation from the injury. So when you get a TBI, apparently, the first incident of the strike causes some damage, but most of the damage comes from the inflammation consequent to the strike. That depends a little bit on adrenaline to do that. So that's one thing I learned that could be really useful for MMA. I use a beta blocker almost every morning because I have high adrenaline anyway. So I just like to smooth out my adrenaline in the mornings when adrenaline peaks. Yep. It's pretty innocuous. Sometimes when I get stressed, I'll take a beta blocker as well. All it does is block adrenaline, lasts 6 to 8 hours or so. That's one thing. The second thing I learned, which is something I've been using, experimenting a lot with myself, is called cerebral lysine. Cerebral lysine is purified pig growth factors from the brain. Not the brain of the pig, but the growth factors, namely brain-derived neurotrophic factor, nerve growth factor, glial cell-derived neurotrophic factor. So I've been injecting this in me a little bit experimentally to see if it could help my clients who are addicts, who are recovering from addiction. Because Ibogaine really helps people get off addiction and it increases neurogenesis, the growth of new neurons in the brain. So I thought this might work. Turned out really to work. Helped a lot of people get off opiates already. The other thing that it does is basically, because of these growth factors coming in the brain, when you have growth factors in the body, it doesn't just cause cells to divide. It also causes cells not to die when they're attacked. The growth factors prevent cells from dying. So cerebral lysine was actually invented to treat TBIs. It's actually mainly given for that. I've been using it off-label for other stuff. But it's interesting that in the US, they don't use that. I've never heard of, and I've talked to a bunch of psychiatrists in LA telling them about cerebral lysine, and they just never heard of it. So in Eastern Europe, they use it a lot. It's extremely effective. You can feel it the next day. You feel the neurogenesis in your mind. You sleep, you rest. It's like taking a lot of growth hormones. It's very interesting.
How safe is this to take on a regular basis? Is it recommended for a regular basis outside of trauma, one-time trauma for just life and longevity?
Great question. So it's never been used in a long-term basis. It's only been used as an injection for 5 to 10 days in a row following either stroke or TBI. However, I used it for a couple of reasons. So the background is this. So the way SSRIs work to treat depression is actually they increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor in the brain. And apparently in animals, all mammals, if you give them more growth factors, they get not depressed and less anxious. So I wanted to see if cerebral lysine could do that for people that are scared of SSRIs for short-term use. And it works for that also. So I've been experimenting with these things. These may be a bit more dangerous, but using them right after a TBI for 5 days, that has been used for 40 years, never been any sign of any side effects. No prion, that brain stuff, none of that. So there's no evidence. It's very interesting. I thought to tell you about it. Now, moving to the next question by G.O.A.T.s. He wanted to ask you about dieting. He said, if you're on a strict cutting diet, trying to get body fat to extremely low levels, does Mike believe in using carbohydrates? If so, what meals would he use them in, and what's his go-to carbohydrates and why? For weight loss.
Well, I had mentioned the importance of fruit. That we maintain it. We keep that in. We eat white rice, we eat oats, we eat quinoa, amaranth, barley, chickpeas, black beans, as well as just a wide variety of produce, butternut squash and such things as they're.
You like lentils?
Lentils, loves lentils. Yeah, lentils with a few poached eggs on top. I had lentils with 3 poached eggs on top and some charred cauliflower.
Beautiful.
Fucking for breakfast. It's amazing, right? And of course, you think about the long-term effects of the carbohydrate conversation, maybe to slowly go on that. Carbohydrate is the primary fuel source for all athletic activity and cognitive function and life processes in many ways. The reduction of an essential fuel source makes no sense. It's a contradictory thought pattern for a stated outcome. Knowing this, we must then remove the options off the table. So instead of cutting carbs to lose weight, cutting carbs to get fat, we use carbs to initiate other processes. Higher intensity levels of training, greater execution of specific types of movement as you're strategic with carbohydrate intake. So I put that out there again to think about the preservation of the health of the organism, as opposed to just simply the weight loss, fat loss goal, which in our experience and opinion will be never any better and likely less anyway than a healthful approach, which again utilizes carbohydrates. So and that's the mix.
This isn't explored a lot. Yeah, it's clear. Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah,
but it's so rarely followed. As your practice, my practice, I'm sure we come across the same confused.
It's so tempting for people to want the diuretic effect of going on a ketogenic diet. It looks like they lost so much weight. So the feeling of that is just so attractive. I think it makes people, because you lose 10 pounds the first week. So you felt like it's more effective. It's hard to ignore that aspect, Okay, there's a general question. I don't want to take too much more of your time. Just a couple more. Last questions. So Elia Milos, a longtime listener, says, who are Mike's top 5 MMA greatest GO.A.T.s? I don't know what they are. Greatest. What is GO.A.T.? What does it stand for? That
GO.A.T. is the greatest of all time.
This is actually a Jay-Z lyric. That's where it comes from. But I just discovered. But anyway, so who are Mike's top 5 MMA GO.A.T.s? Who is the biggest talent in MMA currently, and who is the hardest worker in MMA that he knows?
All right, so top 5 MMA GO.A.T.s, we're going to have to point to this man right here, George St. Pierre. And what I say is I'll put a Mount Rushmore of great athletes because time and era and weight class, all this stuff matters. George St. Pierre is definitely on the list. John Jones is on the list. Fedor Emelianenko is on the list. And then we get a little, for me, I start to really look around a little bit more because those athletes right there competed in the heyday of the division and beat everyone. They beat the killers, right? We could say John Jones might have had a tougher route to dominance. Fedor and GSP are right there also. Who has had that benefit? Hard to say. So I don't want to blame the athlete for the lack of comparative talent in the division. And that is being very false with my words because all these athletes are amazing, right? Certain athletes like George, like John, like Fedor, they really do excel up above everything else. So with that said, I will now say the fourth face on the Mount Rushmore of MMA is Chael P. Sonnen. You must put Chael on the face of MMA because athletically he's at that level. But what he's done outside the sport of MMA to grow the modern era of MMA, there is no Conor McGregor without Chael Sonnen.
Really interesting. I have to research two of the names. The last two names I didn't know who they were. I'm learning the sport though. I'm very
sure. It's a beautiful sport.
He says who's the hardest working MMA guy currently that you know of? Or I think he said in general, yeah. Who's the hardest worker you've ever seen?
Man, they all work hard. I'll put Ronda Rousey at the very highest of the list of the hardworking athletes that I had the pleasure of working with. Ronda at 5, if Ronda's supposed to be in the pool at 5 a.m., which she would often be in the pool at 5 a.m., she was in the fucking pool at 5 a.m. That was it. No matter what's going on in the world, she's in the pool in training. So she would have to be the one I was most impressed with their diligence.
Fascinating. Well, Mike, we've got to get you more often on the channel. I'm going to ask you one last question, but I meant to have you more frequently. It's just I've been busy with the kid coming. I have 10 weeks left, by the way, till my daughter will be born. So I'm really excited. We set up, all the baby stuff and we've been getting ready. But we want to have you on more often because it's such a pleasure always to talk to you. The last question I want to ask you, Mike, is from Joshua Vallis. He says, Mike, what would your advice be for a long-term... no, it's a cycle advice. I don't want to ask that one. Well, I'll check a different one instead. Unfortunately, my channel has a lot of PED questions. People want to ask PEDs, but I don't. So, this one's interesting. It says, what are the odds of Weili Zhang being on a Chinese designer steroid and possibly backed by government aid? Their government would have strong interest in her success for propaganda reasons. Asian women never get that muscular naturally, especially not in an endurance sport, in my opinion. What do you think about what this guy said?
Well, to be fair, I think that could be said about many athletes, the athletes over in Russia, the athletes over in Cuba, the athletes in Brazil, the athletes in the United States, in the UK, and Australia. As we go around the horn again, I think we could say that there's a high possibility some of those high-ranking athletes are probably taking something and they're being assisted by those with greater funding or importance, whatever that might be. So there is a hierarchy here. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if it happened, but I have no blame or claim to say that she's not 100% natural. That would be unfair also, because I know of very many hardworking athletes that are 100% lifetime natural, and they kick the shit out of the known high-level dopers.
No way.
So not every time, but I would never make such a open statement without clear data. That's just unfair.
Fantastic. Very responsible response. Thank you so much, Mike. Well, are you free if we do it every 2 weeks or something? We have a short 30-minute talk. That would be great, Mike.
Yeah, no, I love it. I enjoy your show, Leo. I enjoy the channel. I enjoy you and Boston and Eric and Tony on there recently. Have you been watching our podcast, which isn't always posted on my show? It's called Bio Bros with Derek and Steve. Yeah, I'm a big fan of that show. Favorite. Derek and Steve independently. I certainly do follow the channel and the content. I love the personalities. It's entertaining as a 45-year-old fitness dude, right? So I'm a mark also for good content, but also as a peer, man, you guys are spot on. You're really open-minded. I've said this before, Leo, so I'm not just blowing smoke here, but you guys really do add context to the conversation. That's not the regular gym bro that it has been for 15 years or so in pop culture forums, YouTube fitness, and, all the whole T-Nation days and the, Get Big and all that shit. So as the trajectory goes, it's nice to see you and Steve and Derek out there. That type of content is really a level up. Palumbo, kind of before that, he bridged the bro, maybe expanded a little bit with fairness, and Lobeliner out there kind of like in that phase. I think they kind of bridged the bro. And now you guys are science bros, bio bros. So it's really nice to hear the deeper context. I think you're all fucking crazy sometimes. I'm like, what are you taking? What is it for?
I experiment with a lot of things. That's true.
None crazier than Boston. I don't know him. I'm sorry?
But that's why I wanted to have you more often, because you add so much value to the channel, really, Mike. You're really probably my favorite guest I've ever had, as I told you before the first time. So I'd love to have you more often. It reflects so much on the channel, and you're such a deep resource of information about something I know nothing about, but I'm so interested in.
Yeah,
So thank
brother,
you so
I
much.
love it, man. I love it.
Have a
Leo.
great day today, Mike, and I'll contact you soon for our next episode.
All
All
right.
right. Bye-bye, brother. Take care.